So it seduces you in, it makes you feel that this is the thing, and it's true. You do need an edge. You need to get one up on other people. So you need to strive for the highest standards. You need to work long hours, day after day, to reach those standards in the culture in which we live. But perfectionism, and here I'm talking about what I'm describing as a perfectionist. Okay, here we get down to the nitty-gritty of definitions. Perfectionist is a person who's only satisfied with the highest standards, who has a disposition to find anything short of perfection unacceptable. And thirdly, has a desire, a constant desire, to be unblemished in appearance and faultless in their behavior, in their performance. These are pretty high standards to keep up with. Now, I know some of you are writing these things down. I could make some of the written slides available for you if you want them, but I'll try and go at a speed where you can write. Now, when we talk about perfectionism, I think it's, we find, I myself am perfectionist in some areas of life. I got into this partly because of the number of people that I met in my counseling and psychotherapy practice and when I was doing psychiatry who struggled with an unhealthy form of perfectionism, obsessive tendencies. And as I looked around in my family and my wife's family, I saw all sorts of degrees of perfectionism. And some healthy, what I thought as healthy, and some unhealthy. We'll come back to that distinction. But it was interesting that it occurs, I think, in different forms in different people. A few people are all-round perfectionists, but most people are perfectionists in just one area of life, or one or two areas. So you may be a perfectionist about your appearance, how your body is, what your hair looks like, your face, your teeth. It may be in relation to the look of your house. I had a friend in the church back in England who I was trying to help at one point way back, and she would not let her neighbors come into her house or friends come into her house because she was so embarrassed that it would not be perfectly clean or tidy. And if occasionally they did come in, she would put newspaper down on the carpet so that they wouldn't leave any dirty marks. And her children's friends were not allowed into the house lest they put their dirty hands on the wall going up the stairs and leave marks there. That's an extreme end of the appearance perfectionism. Her parents were both perfectionists. They came from a house that was just immaculate. The grass was always cut a certain height. In England, we cut it shorter than you do here. Then you might be a perfectionist in relation to a performance. And the key thing about the unhealthy form of perfectionism is if your whole identity rests in it. So that the appearance perfectionist says, I am how I look, only perfectly, hopefully. My identity rests in my looks. The performance perfectionist would be, I am how I perform, getting straight A's, being the best athlete, whatever it is. So the appearance, performance, one might say there are moral perfectionists. If you know the Bible well, you know that the Pharisees were the ultimate in moral perfectionists. They not only obeyed the law, the Ten Commandments, but they added on to the scriptures, the law of God, lots and lots and lots of little laws which everyone had to keep. And they felt they were the most righteous people. And they were terrified of making a mistake, of offending those many laws. I have one student who tells me that his father drives at exactly 3 miles an hour below the speed limit. He never exceeds the speed limit wherever he goes. And he is like that in life in general. He expects other people to keep the law, the rules, whether it's his children or other people in the church, exactly, within a hair's breadth. And that I would call a moral perfectionist. And perhaps someone who is more concerned about the externals and legalistic about those externals of how you dress to church. those sorts of things. And then we might talk about the relational perfectionist. I'm just going to introduce this concept here. But there are some people who are perfectionist in a self-reflective way. They're always looking at themselves, comparing themselves with other people, I'm feeling scared that other people will discover their flaws and their imperfections. So they're wary of getting close to other people, wary of intimacy, lest they be discovered. There's always that sense of being an imposter. They'll find out who I really am behind the world that I show them. That would be the sort of self-reflective. And then the other-oriented perfectionist would be someone who is always expecting other people to live up to very high standards, but doesn't have quite such high standards for themselves. This is the nightmare boss that you don't want to work for. The person who's always criticizing you, telling you exactly how things ought to be done. But that doesn't make for good relationships. And then the all-round perfectionist, which gets pretty close to the obsessive-compulsive person, and I'll come back to that probably tomorrow. But someone who is perfectionist in all of these areas, has very high standards in these areas. Now, I've been hinting at the fact that perfectionism may have some assets. You can see some of the liabilities, and we'll go into those in more detail tomorrow. But I see it as something that is sometimes good and sometimes bad. This woman who I was telling you about, who won't let her children's friends come into the house, she is an incredible dressmaker. She makes children's dresses with beautiful embroidery on them, wonderful tiny stitch work that she does. Sells them to some of the best stores in London. That's where her perfectionism comes out in a good, productive way. I have a friend also in England who is a high school teacher. She's a brilliant high school teacher, teaching 10th, 11th, 12th grade, college entrance. Most of her kids got into very good colleges. And yet when she had her first baby, she fell apart and went into quite a deep depression. She couldn't deal with the broken nights, the disordered life, something coming out of every orifice of her baby at the same time that she couldn't clean up fast enough. This was not her. She was a person who likes everything ordered, structured, neat, and efficient. So in some areas it's good, some it's bad. If I were to have a brain operation, I would like to have a somewhat perfectionist brain surgeon. I like to have a perfectionist window cleaner. Someone working on my car, I like him to have high standards. But when that neurosurgeon goes home at night, if he expects those same impeccable, flawless standards from his wife and children that he expects from his surgical team, he may have problems in his marriage and in his family, because they're not going to be like that. They're going to be flawed and imperfect. So the question comes, is perfectionism healthy or unhealthy? Is it normal or neurotic? And I'm suggesting to you it is a bit of both. Now there is a whole school of thought which you may read about in books and in the psychology world that's an argument that suggests that all perfectionism is bad. When you think of the word perfectionism, just if you think of it as primarily a negative thing, you've always thought of it as perfectionism is bad. Can you raise your hand a minute? I'd be interested to see how many of you think of it like that. Okay, how many of you think of it as a spectrum thing, sometimes good, sometimes bad? Maybe I've made too good a case already that you're already persuaded. Okay, it's about half and half, I guess, there. But there are some people who would talk about what I'm talking about as the normal, healthy perfectionism as a person of excellence. And people have said to me, you need to invent another word for these people. Excellencism, as one of my students said. Sort of clumsy word. So they would say a person of excellence versus a perfectionist. I'm taking the view that it's, I've had many debates for many hours with my family and my wife about this, but I think I'm sticking to the view that I think there is a spectrum of this. And let me help you to see a little more of this spectrum. There was a research done amongst quite a lot of academically gifted sixth graders, hundreds of them, and they did this on a scale. They measured them on a particular perfectionism scale, and they came up with this spectrum here. There were those up at the left-hand end here who are dysfunctional perfectionists, about 25% of them. These are the unhealthy, neurotic perfectionists, okay? Take it too far. And then in the middle, the 42%, the healthy perfectionists, those who pursue excellence, have high standards, good students. And I would imagine in a population like this, most of you were academically gifted sixth graders, that probably it comes out about the same proportions. I think in the adult world, it's pretty much like this as well. And then the non-perfectionists, well, what do we do about them? Who are they? They're the ones who don't understand what I'm talking about, I don't know quite what the word is for them, but in the research, it was found that they were disorganized, unreliable, lacking in self-discipline. And I think that's a bit unkind, because I have a child who is delightfully laid back. In my children, I see a huge spectrum, each of them on a different place on this spectrum. But someone who is laid back, easygoing, has a lot of good qualities in life. And I think actually there's a spectrum even within this of those who are disorganized and unreliable, the slobs of life, and those who are just somewhat relaxed, easygoing, maybe a little slothful at times. I don't know what the word is. But for them, these posters I think are quite fun. It says, if you can't learn to do something well, learn to enjoy doing it poorly. And this next one takes a few liberties, I think, with the Tower of Pisa. It says, it takes a lot less time, and most people won't notice the difference until it's too late. You notice the website comes from despair.com. If you want some fun posters, it's a good website. So let me then define a little more clearly what I think the healthy aspects of perfectionism. High standards that are high beyond reach or reason. They strain compulsively and unremittingly towards impossible goals. They feel their best efforts are never good enough, and they are unable to feel satisfaction or joy in a job well done. And then this is a key one I've hinted at already. They measure their own worth entirely in terms of productivity and accomplishment. So their sense of value and identity rests in this. And they are preoccupied with performance and or appearance, depending on which type of perfectionism they are part of. So this is the unhealthy side. Now, what is the healthy type of perfectionism? Here is, and you might call this the person of excellence if you don't take the spectrum view of this. They pursue excellence. They derive a very real sense of pleasure from the labors of a painstaking effort to meet high standards. So there's real pleasure in it, rather than the pain and the fear of the unhealthy perfectionist who's always afraid they're going to fail. And they can't really enjoy what they are doing for that reason. They feel free to be as precise as the situation permits, so they can have a bit of give and take on standards. They rejoice in their skills, and they appreciate a job well done. David Stoop, another psychologist, has put them in two very helpful columns here that I borrowed from his book. Gives you, again, a sense of the contrast. He contrasts between the perfectionist and the person of excellence. I'm saying these are the two sides of unhealthy and healthy perfectionism. The idealism versus realism, the striving for the impossible versus the doable, the fearing failure and contrasted with anticipating success, being product-minded. They're only interested in the end product, but therefore the process is painful and difficult, and they're not really interested in that. They have to be the best, want to do their best, view life as a threat or a challenge. View life as a threat. That challenge should be on the other side there. Hate criticism versus welcome criticism. The healthy perfectionist is able to some degree to accept criticism. Dwells on mistakes, learns from mistakes, values self by what they do versus values self for who they are. Now, another way of talking about types of perfectionism is that some people are hard driving perfectionists. Other people who have maybe tried to do that and then they have given up. I've mentioned this already. They have become what we might call defeated perfectionists. So some people might say to me, I'm not a perfectionist, my house is always a tip. Well, the question is that you may be just a slob, lazy, or it may be that you have such high standards that you feel that you'll never get it to those standards, so you never even try. You never even begin. So either you've never started or you've tried and then given up completely. So this is the sort of active, productive driving contrasted with the passive, somewhat passive and paralyzed, defeated perfectionist, still a perfectionist, but they tend to be indecisive and procrastinators in life, not able to push forward into this other side. There is another more academic classification of perfectionism, the self-oriented, the socially prescribed, these are larger, somewhat more clumsy words, and the other-oriented perfectionist. And I'm just going to, I think, probably I'm going to stop here for tonight, and we'll go into these tomorrow because we then begin to get into some of the perils of perfectionism. There are various books around how to live with a perfectionist. I think it works both ways. You know, in marriage, one of the things that you learn very quickly is that you're not going to change the essential nature of the other person. My wife and I, after 33 years, have just decided we should give up trying to change each other. And I think there's something like that there's something of in marriage or in any good relationship, when you are accepted just as you are, with all your flaws and imperfections and perfectionist tendencies and traits, then there's more incentive to change towards the other person than if you feel all the time you're being criticized and being forced to change, made to change. So I think there's a lot in marriage about just really understanding, getting to know the other person, loving them as they are. Now then, discussing, you obviously have to, at some point, discuss the things that are difficult between you. You know, what is essential, what is badness and sinfulness, and what is just the way you are. And I think a lot of the things that we label often, he's a really bad, selfish person, are quite often temperamental traits that are very difficult to change. And so I think when you're working with and I will get into this tomorrow in the last part, we'll talk about strategies for change. How can you begin to help yourself and work together with someone else to begin to change? Perfectionism is by its nature, is a fairly rigid thing. One of the hardest things for perfectionists to do is to change, because what they like to do is to feel in control and like sameness and order and structure. And once you start shaking that order and structure, they often get more afraid and more structured. So we'll talk a little bit, get more into that, and I'll try and bear that question in mind as we go through tomorrow. There's just a little foretaste of what we may get into.
how does a person balance idealism, optimism, perfectionism? How can you differentiate between the three, its healthiness, if you have all three traits?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I can only try to talk around it a bit. And you're right, I think there is a huge amount of, there's a lot of idealism in perfectionism because you believe that the world can be better than it really is. You believe that you can be better than you really are. You actually, as I will say again tomorrow, you're trying to live outside reality. We live in a fallen, broken, imperfect world, and I think the perfectionist is struggling to push back those boundaries this side of them and sort of grasp heaven now. Now, many teenagers anyway, are idealistic. And the real danger, of course, of idealism is that when your dreams are shattered, as you grow up and you become an adult, and I've seen this in a lot of young people, they swing to the other extreme of cynicism. And you begin to believe that nothing's worth doing. And you give up, and you see the teenager who gives up. And this extreme, of course, this is where the all or nothing, black or white thinking of the perfectionist comes in together with this, that you flip to the defeated perfectionist, the cynic, on the other side. But they're all. But the good part, we don't want to lose idealists completely. We want people of vision and passion and energy, pushing those of us who are less idealistic and perhaps have grown old and cynical. If you think of David in the face of Goliath, they were all standing around thinking, we can never beat this guy. And David comes along, this whippersnapper of a guy who's been out looking after the sheep, the youngest brother, and joins his brothers and in a sense he says, what are you all doing? Don't you have any faith? Can't with God on our side, we can go out and get this giant. There's an idealism of youth in that, which in that situation worked. Sometimes it's over-idealistic. But so somehow we need to keep some idealism in our souls and hearts. Yeah. I will talk about Jesus' command, be perfect. that's the text you all need, isn't it? Those of you who are perfectionists, to tell you you're on the right road. But we'll talk about what he's meaning by that and what the New Testament is pointing us towards tomorrow. And God is a perfectionist in the sense that he requires perfection of us. But the question I want to leave you with, I'm not going to answer that one either because we'll come back to is what is the perfection that he is calling you towards? And can you do it on your own? What sort of perfection? Is it about appearance and performance? And so I'll leave that one with you to meditate overnight and talk about. And about spiritual perfectionism. I'm not quite sure what you mean exactly, but there is, I think, a perfectionism of some Christians who have an idea of what the real spiritual person is. The person who is reading the Bible an hour a day, praying 2 hours a day. All the great saints have done that, so I should do that. I've got to have my quiet time, otherwise my day will be completely ruined. And the most spiritual activities I can do are working for a Christian organization or going to seminary, becoming a preacher, a pastor, a full-time missionary, and going to church and prayer and Bible study. Those are all the highest forms of spiritual activity that I should pursue, which is a completely wrong view of spirituality, I would suggest to you. We need to think about the spirituality of the whole of life. The ordinary things of changing a baby's diaper, of working at your computer trying to do a good job in your work, of washing the dishes, the attitude with which you do those is just as spiritual, just as important as how long you spend in prayer, how long you spend studying the Bible. Those things are good, but your spirituality is not judged externals of certain habits of behavior and how long you spend in prayer or how many times you go to church. They're all useful and important disciplines. So I guess it's how you think of spirituality and also how sort of legalistic a view. I think legalists tend to focus on the external behavioral aspects of Christianity. Whether you're in church on Sunday, what sort of clothes you wear to church. That is a false view of spirituality. Again, tomorrow we'll talk more about this, but there is a link between perfectionism and suicide. There's a link between perfectionism, unhealthy perfectionism, and depression and suicide. And I'll give you an example of that tomorrow, but the key thing in that really is when you feel you have failed at something, which is often a reason why when a dream shattered, when you feel you failed, perfectionists are very hard on themselves, and here you get into the all or nothing thinking. I failed in this, no one loves me, I must be a complete disaster, I might as well go away and take my life. That sort of extreme thinking is much more common in perfectionists who get depressed than non-perfectionists who get depressed. So yes, there is a relationship between the two. As for a genetic, yes, I think there is a genetic factor in perfectionism. It's not the whole story, but some people from a very young age are concerned about order, cleanliness, tidiness, etc. More on that tomorrow too. That's a very good question, and I think there needs to be a group of Christians in advertising who need to sit down together and to really work through some of the issues that they're wrestling with in that. What things are, I maybe overstated the point. Not all advertising is to make you covet. Some advertising is to tell you about really good things, isn't it? It's informing you. That's what the early advertisements, when commercials started, were not trying to make you dissatisfied. They were just trying to tell you, this is what we've got out here. It's a very helpful thing in your life, whether it's a detergent or whatever it is. I think the age of self-improvement and self-fulfillment, many of the advertisements are appealing to that now as well. So there's a legitimate letting people know, and how do you do that without appealing to base desires is a very critical question. I think there can be a lot of creativity in that. I think humor is wonderful in advertising, and it appeals to something different from just lust and greed. It catches our attention in a much more healthy way than other forms of advertising. That's off the top of my head rather rapidly.